Look, ladies, I want to be clear. If anything in government is going to change, if we're going to protect our hair, our kids, our lives, it starts with a vote. So join Citizen She and 4910 Rosalie Productions to detangle the vote and squad up.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Topic Tuesday. We are back. We took a little bit of a hiatus, but we are right back in your living rooms, on your screen, to inform you about issues and things that we need to know so we can be well-informed voters and go ahead and, mess this up. I have my friend back who was with us 2 weeks ago, Ebony Baylor. Ebony, come on up here.
Hello. Good morning.
Good morning. Ebony, you and I, like we said, a couple weeks ago, we've been friends for a little bit, meeting at NLC. We met during this work.
Yes.
And we're still here doing this work, even talking this morning about how we're going to continue doing the work.
Absolutely.
And so that is the friendship. But Ebony, reintroduce yourself to everybody so they know where this expertise is coming from.
Well, good morning all again for those who was unable a few weeks ago. My name is Ebony Baylor. I serve as the African American Political Director for the Democratic National Committee. I am a native of Shreveport, Louisiana. Looking forward to hosting you all for Bayou Classic in April. And I'm a Southern University graduate. Graduated in 2008 with political science and my master's in public administration in 2013. So go Jags.
My friends are brilliant. I just brag about people. But that's right. Shreveport is getting Bayou Classic.
Yes, just for April because the Superdome is under construction. I know people are very sad in New Orleans and Baton Rouge, but please, we look forward to hosting you in Shreveport.
I rock with Shreveport. If anyone who has not been to Shreveport is dope. And that corridor under the bridge where all those businesses are, I rock with it.
Thank you, Nia. Thank you.
Yes. And our first campaign was in Shreveport. Our very first campaign was in Shreveport. So love Shreveport. Well, let's get into it this morning, Ebony, because we're trying to get quick information out very quickly. Yes. What are we talking about today, Ebony?
We are talking about protecting our right to vote, being sure that when you go cast your vote, that your vote is counted, and just giving you and empowering you with the tools that you need to make sure on election day, early voting and vote by mail, that your voice is heard.
Yes, because the reality is, Ebony, that if we show up, the things that we want, the things that we need, the things that we believe in, we can have them. I mean, that's just real, right? That's just real. Yes.
True.
So I love this quote by Carol Anderson, because when we talk about voter suppression, which is, what the way we frame it, but voter suppression, it's here. All the other tactical stuff, but here, the belief that our vote doesn't matter, which is not true. And so I love this quote that voter suppression is designed to demoralize the electorate, to make people believe that doesn't matter and that the system is rigged and your vote doesn't count. And that is a false narrative.
100% true. Kudos to Dr. Anderson. She is such a wonderful and powerful political scientist. And all this information is true. Voter suppression has become and is a political tactic for those who want us to minimize our power. Voting is power.
Yes. And the reality is that they've spent so much time and money on it because, once we realize it, I think about The Wiz, and when we wake up from the shell and it's a brand new day, right? When we feel our brand new day, ain't nothing they can do to us. Nothing.
Absolutely not. The political power that we get when we vote together as a collective, especially as Black people and Black women, we can change, and we can, and we are changing the world.
Exactly. Let's do the next slide. So the reality is that they've attacked our voting rights.
Yes.
Since the beginning. When we look at the constitutional convenings that happened even in Louisiana, post, the Emancipation Proclamation, they were like, okay, we got all these free Black folks that are going to vote, run for office, change the way we do things. They came up with ways to start suppressing our vote from jump.
Yeah, no, absolutely. They immediately start to put in the roadmap of barriers for voting. Once, unfortunately, Black women wasn't included, but when Black men. So when you have a Black governor in the state of Louisiana, people start to get nervous. So how do you keep that? You start to put in barriers. You start removing. You start imposing, and finding reasons for them to get arrested so they can lose their right to vote. So they have just created these barriers systematically because we started to have Black representation.
Sure. I think about, Reconstruction, Ebony, a lot because it was really, I don't think that there was a time that we had been, we had just been freed, right? And after just getting free, we were messing it up. We were building and forming things and getting elected to office and running and reforming the community literally right after slavery, right? That happened at jump.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Because when we got those rights, and when you think about the 35th Compromise, that's what they were nervous about, because they knew that there was a very large Black populations in these enslaved territories. So it's how can we minimize the apportionment of their power? You designate them as 3/5, and then you start putting it in all these different places. So they have recognized our political power even before they gave us the right to vote.
There you go, Ebony. They recognize our power even before they passed it on. So you're absolutely right. I do want to go into a little bit of history just so we can know where we came from. So and there's also this reality, Ebony, that we feel heavy, but we've been here before.
Yeah.
And we've fought through it before, and we've won before. So understanding our history helps us understand we are not in something new, and we've been through here, and we've won. So the literacy test, you gave me such a really good space around the literacy test. I'd love for you to kind of talk about that a little bit.
No, absolutely. So what used to happen back in the day when our ancestors went to go vote, they had so many barriers. So they had barriers like the poll tax, where you literally had to pay a tax to vote, knowing that people were marginalized and didn't have the funds to vote. And then when they realized that we had economic power, they started to impose things like the literacy test. So literally a test that it is I am a PhD student at Howard, and I look at some of these questions and I'm like, what is going on?
And let me go to the next slide as you're talking, because the next slide shows what some of this looked like.
Yes. And Louisiana had one of the most egregious literacy tests. In some communities, they'll make you recite the preamble of the Constitution. They may ask you to recite the amendments. But this literally was a test. And if you miss one of them, and you see, it's so confusing. It is very confusing. They did this test on people who went to other schools and college students, and those who went to some of the best and brightest schools in the country could not pass this test. So we wouldn't have been able to vote. So you had to be literally a genius in order to vote if you were in the state of Louisiana.
And not even just a genius, Ebony, but you had to have some kind of weird mindset that even come up with this test to be able to pass a test like this. I tried to take it and I did not pass it. And you're right, that realization that had my birth story been decades before, I wouldn't have been able to vote. And I think when we have, because one thing that I think that is a hard rhetoric sometimes for Black folks to eat is when we talk about people putting their lives on the line for us to have the right to vote. And the reality is that the reason why you and I can have this call platform space to even talk about the craziness that happened before or now is because they did it when it wasn't so dope, when they weren't getting funded, when they weren't, when actual, I worry about safety, but I don't have to worry about my house getting bombed. I'm saying? I don't have to worry about, being injured in my driveway for sending people up to vote. And so
Yeah, no, absolutely. And one of the stories I like to share is some of our own, Dr. Elsie Scott, who's at Howard, who went to Southern. Her dad, just a Louisiana reference, that happened to her dad and her family when he was organizing people to vote in northeast Louisiana, outside of the Monroe area. This is something that we think about in other states, but these are things that were actually happening in the state of Louisiana. So when we talk about this context, this is something that is home. This is something that is close. And I think even as we think about, as we protect our right to vote, that we have to give ourselves permission. When we think about this process, we have been in this country for over 400 years, but we've been only given our full access to some degree as they are rolling back the protections for 50 plus years.
Yeah. That's
5 decades.
I never even thought about it in that context. You know, we always talk about, you know, the 60s not being that long ago, but you're right, 55 years, Ebony.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I will say two things. A, shocking, like listening to those numbers, because numbers impact me, but like really proud of Black folks for what we have done in 55 years.
Yeah.
You know, to be here and done in a country that intentionally left us out of its construction when they're thinking about what citizenship looks like. And so I'm just like, yo, Black folks dope. I'm sorry.
We are amazing.
Black folks are dope. Let's do the next slide. So when we talk about SNCC, you know, and I love that we have so many conversations about it. You know, we talk about King and like all the things, but it was a progressive group that did some progressive things and thought outside the box, because the box didn't include us. So we had to pretend like the box didn't exist and move differently, right? And so these are some of the things that they did. But we want to talk about some of these, Ebony?
Yeah, and as you think about SNCC and as they were organizing in the Freedom Sundays, as they were going and pulling in people from other communities to come in and train, giving them tactical training about how you were going to be interactive when you were trying to register someone to vote, giving them legal protections and moving around. I think if you have an opportunity, being in Louisiana, to go to Jackson, they have a wonderful civil rights museum that really lays out the practices in Freedom Sunday, in Freedom Summers, in what SNCC really did to organize people around voting. And they did it with people from all communities, from all colors, from all races, all ethnicities and religions. So Black people in all can have a right to vote. So it was an inclusive thing. It was a progressive thing, because they realized that we were full citizens as Black people and we deserve the right to vote.
Absolutely. And you know, when I think about where we are now and I'm watching the creativity of organizations across the country, I'm like, oh, we're repeating exactly what worked before. You know, if we want to have ideas and thoughts and feelings of, is this really going to work? Is this really going to like change something? Like, we are literally taking out of their playbook. And so if we're doing that, we know what that result was, maybe not the fullness, and they're still trying to push us back, but the Civil Rights Act was passed. Yes. In a time when it was even more, or I think it's even more dangerous because it's but like in a time when they thought it was not possible, it was possible, and it happened.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
Like, what we're doing is not in vain. I'll say that.
No, it is not in vain, and that's why we have to be vigilant when you think about the political process. And one thing that gives me comfort is knowing that it wasn't intended for me to be a part of it. So that's why I have to be more aggressive to make sure that I remain at the table, because it never was intended for me to be a part of it, but I have a right being here, being born here. My ancestors were brought here, but I was born here. So I have rights as a citizen in this country, whether you want me to have it or not.
Bruh. Next slide, please. I love the way you said that, Ebony. Like, whether you want me to have it or not. Now, when we talk about federal protection, like, people think that because we have the Civil Rights Act, we good, we Gucci. And that all the things that we're talking about doing when we talk about changing polling locations, or, you know, the stuff that the Secretary of State might do, we think that is a heightened legal protection because of the Civil Rights Act. But actually,
no, that's not correct. I want to bring it also, but the Voting Rights Act of 1965 is what really gave us our protections. And so if we look at Shelby v. Holder, that was brought in 2013, it rescinded it invalidated the formula that they used to identify voter suppression, which kind of invalidates Section 5, which is a pre-clearance. So what happened in the past before a state made changes to their voting, especially if it was a state identified to have voter suppression tactics in place, they had to get approval from the federal government before those changes could be imposed. That no longer exists. So that is why they're looking to push the new VRA for the John Lewis Voting Rights Act bill through Congress to give a new formula. Congresswoman Fudge worked very hard going through this country to show that voter suppression and intimidation does exist, and there's a need for federal protection. And so when you think about it, like in Louisiana, you probably had your grandmother that's been voting in the same polling location for 25 years. Then after 2013, he was like, wait a minute, my polling location changed, and they didn't give you notification. They can do that now because they don't have federal oversight.
Yep. And that, I appreciate you bringing us Shelby. And I talk about post-Shelby, living in a post-Shelby time in the South, everything, and when you think about like Stacey Abrams' campaign, right, where she, won, but the voter suppression tactics disallowed her from taking her seat as governor. And so one of the tactics that they used was overwhelming the polls, because they can try to suppress, but if you overwhelm the poll with numbers, there's only so much they can do. And so, I love that strategy. So the reality is, for us to really win, we all have to show up.
Yeah, we have to show up, show out, and overperform, because we don't want this to be litigated in court, because if it goes to court, you got somebody who has put people in place that has looked to suppress our vote. So we want it overwhelming. We don't want this to be, it needs to be a landslide.
Absolutely. And, early voting in Louisiana starts this week. I'm so proud of organizations like Power Coalition and Voice of the Experience, who litigated and pushed for our early voting to start earlier. It's supposed to start on the what was it? The
20th originally.
Yeah. And now we have 4 extra days.
Yes.
Early voting. And those of us, I know personally, I believe in progressive ideas and candidates and policy. And so for those of us that believe in that, early voting is a way for our voices to be heard in a more impactful way.
Yes. And also, you want to make sure that when you are voting, take all the tools, make sure you have the laws, make sure you are following all the guidelines. If you are voting by mail, I vote by mail in Louisiana. So if you look at that ballot says completed with a black pen or black lead pencil. You have to have a witness signature. You need to follow all those things, because anything like that, if you do a blue ink, it can invalidate your ballot. So make sure, especially if you're voting by mail, I know there are a lot of people voting by mail for the first time, follow those instructions. And if you can drop it off at a drop box as opposed to mailing it back, we encourage you to drop it off and do a caravan to the early vote or the drop box to ensure that it's getting where it needs to be.
We can have a bus party. We can have one of those.
A car second line to the ballot box.
You know what though? Why you be giving me ideas, Ebony?
Look.
Giving me ideas. I love it.
Look, and Snoop Dogg just released a really nice PSA. I'll share it with you, Nia, later. Call it Drop It, because he just voted for the first time.
Wow. It's so funny. I'm glad you said that, because, we think that everyone around us vote. If we're voting, we think everyone around us votes. But when we have looked at the numbers of Black women in Louisiana, 700,000 eligible, 157,000 actually vote. The reality is most of our friends don't. Most of the people around us don't. And so, it's really interesting to see that people coming out and say, look, I'm voting for the first time. The response should be, yes, I'm so proud of you.
Yes.
A resounding amen and happy and hallelujah, because, people recognizing that democracy can only work if we all participate is a win for all of us. Can we do next slide, please? So, Ebony, these are the realities of, just facts. People, we talk about facts. Young people can play an important role in the 2020 presidential election. How important are young people right now?
Young people are very important. They are going to set the trajectory. So not even for us millennials, for the zennials, the generation behind us millennials, you all can set the trajectory for this country for the next few generations to come. Your vote is so important. Your voice is so powerful, and the access to information and tools that you have is unprecedented. And when you look at the numbers of the zennials that are coming behind us who are voting for the first time, you can help decide this election.
That's real. And that's the other thing. A single vote can make or break an election. Over the past 2 decades, more than a dozen races were decided by a single vote or ended in a tie. And I'm going to say this, Louisiana, we win elections by a couple dozen, a couple hundred votes. That's a neighborhood.
Yes. And there are some times in some elections when there is a tie where some elections are decided by a coin toss. So every vote counts. And even when you think about the trajectory of the presidential election, when you look at those states where there was a deficit, it was like 0.2%, 0.7%. Every vote is going to matter in this election, especially in our local elections. They matter even more.
Yeah.
Single votes.
Yeah. And I think about that, and I've really been thinking about that. It's been resonating with me a lot, Ebony, because I'm like, I don't think people really realize how close these elections are. I think we think because there's so many people and there's assumption that everyone's showing up, that my vote really won't make that difference. But literally, and this one especially, is going to come down, in my opinion, to a couple hundred votes.
It is. And then in 2008, just to give a Louisiana reference, I worked on Paul Carmish's special election. If I'm not mistaken, we lost that election by 0.56%. We were winning up until one parish came in. So we could have had two Democratic, well, three at the time, Democratic representatives, not any partisan, but that was just the reality. That election was decided by less than 1% of the vote.
Yeah, I just wanted to sit with that for a second, because that is so real. So that makes that last statement even much more real, that democracy cannot function without full participation, and early voting improves turnout. I've said this before, and maybe a controversial statement, but I'm gonna say it, that we have reached a point where we can't suggest that people should vote. It's a good idea. I think we have to demand that us and everyone around us shows up. We have got to demand it, because our democracy hinges on our participation in it.
Yeah. And let me just add one thing. I know people are looking at information and polls and data, and they're like, you know what? I don't need to go vote. They're going to be okay. They're going to be fine. That early voting, vote by mail, it is historical. It is high. But there is a push for a turnout on election day. So we cannot be comfortable. We can't be like, oh, the early vote numbers look great. The vote by mail numbers look great. We have this. It is not in the bag. It is not secured. We have to vote, and whoever you are supporting, you need to be running and organizing like your candidate is down 5 points in the polls, and they need every vote. So don't get comfortable.
That's right. I love how you said that, Ebony. I love it. Well, I'm going to close out with a quote from my Fannie Lou. I think I'm going to get the T-shirt because she's incredible. She says, righteousness exalts a nation, but sin is a reproach to any people. Sin is beginning to reproach America today, and we want what is rightfully ours.
Yes.
And that is exactly what you said earlier, Ebony, that, they may not have wanted me to be a citizen. They may not have wanted me to be here, but I am. And because I am, I have the rights of any and every citizen to have my voice heard and have things to reflect what I want in the world that I want to see, in the world I want to hand off to my babies.
Absolutely, 100%.
I love it. Well, we're gonna play our last video, Ebony. We have our movement song that we are kind of pushing through, and that we're hoping that people feel the vibe. And so we're gonna play that in a minute. But I want to thank you so much for being here. I appreciate you every time you come on. Every time I call, text, email, your answer is always yes. And always finding ways to support not just our work, but the state of Louisiana, making sure that everybody's voice is heard and that we are a bigger and better state. So I want to thank you for that work, Ebony.
Yeah, absolutely. Whatever is needed for Louisiana. I have 3 Black, beautiful nieces that are growing up in Louisiana. So I needed to be a better Louisiana. I needed to be a stronger Louisiana. I needed to be an inclusive Louisiana in a place of opportunity. So I am just excited to always do what is needed for the state of Louisiana, for Black women and Black babies. Because I got 3 Black nieces that are coming up.
Yes, I love it. And I love you, Ebony. And I think we're going to close out in a second. I also love having production. you know, because like my hands are free. And so I can just have these dope conversations with these amazing Black women. And so I think we're going to have the video come up in a second. And then here we go. I think it's coming.
And we can work together in this country and to have a democracy. That's what we're going to have to do.
You are the fire, ignite and unite. Together we will win the fight. Rise up and inspire with your natural fire. Together we will win the fight. Dear Black woman.
I love that. Those words were written by one of the Black women that did one of our love letters, Erica Young. Brilliant. She's a brilliant poet, brilliant mother, brilliant human being, but just like lives and rocks for Black women. Gave us those lyrics, and we were able to put that out there. So, you know, early voting in Louisiana, October 16th to the 26th. Check your registration. Yeah. Make a voting plan, and do what, Ebony?
And go vote. Go to iwillvote.com to get information about voting and voting in your state.
Yes, show up and show out. Thank you guys so much for joining us this morning. Thank you, Ebony. Thank you, 49 Rosalie Productions, for producing once again, you know, an amazing morning for us. And we will see you guys tomorrow for She Shows Up, where we will have the Black women producers of Black Panther. Having a great conversation with them. So have a great, wonderful day, and we'll see you guys tomorrow. Have a good one.